So in the Buddha's discourse on mindfulness, which is famous throughout the Buddhist world, the Buddha gave a discourse, long sutta on mindfulness and what constitutes mindfulness and what to become aware of or to pay attention to in your mindfulness practice. So we were exploring the body last week. The second aspect of that is to become aware of vedana. So this is a word that comes from the Pali language. So it's the ancient language that what we've got in terms of scriptures have been passed down over the century or millennia. The original words of the Buddha were just passed down orally, transmitted orally, but they're eventually written down into a thing that's called the Pali canon. So that's language of Pali. The word vedana comes from that. And we often don't translate it here in Triratna because it describes an aspect of experience that we don't normally perhaps think about in the West. So you could translate it as feeling, but it's often when we use the word feeling, and it's often translated as feeling. When we use the word feeling, we're often talking about our feelings, our emotions, more that part of our experience. So it can be a bit misleading to use the word feeling, because Vedana is, as it were, pre our emotions. Yeah. So it's the basic response that we have to our experience as it arises. So we have an experience. I don't know. We eat a cake. Always a favourite experience with people, and we have an immediate response of either liking, disliking, or feeling rather kind of neutral about that experience. So this is what Vedana covers. So we have a sensate experience through one of our senses, and we have a response of either finding that pleasant, unpleasant, or somewhere in between, kind of neutral. We're kind of indifferent to it. And every experience we have, if we look at it, has one of those kind of textures to it. We either consider it pleasant, painful, or neutral. And our responses, are personal. We don't all like and dislike the same things. There's the famous example of Marmite. Some people like it, some people really don't like it. And there are various shades in our responses. So there's, some things we find mildly pleasant, some things very pleasant, some things mildly painful, some things very painful, etc. It's also true, not just from the point of view of our senses, so like cake, it's a taste sense, but it's also true of our mind as well. So in Buddhism, there's considered to be 6 senses, and all 5 senses that we're familiar with being listed, but there's the mind as well is also considered a sense in Buddhism. So a sense is anywhere where an object can arise in a field of awareness. So our 6 senses are, including the mind, are our fields of awareness. So an object can arise within that. So the objects of the mind sense are thoughts, images. Emotions are also categorized into this, although they do tend to involve, a bodily response as well, but they're predominantly considered in Buddhism to be a kind of mental phenomenon, mental arising. So, pages mixed up. Yeah, so we'll have a little look at the 3 kind of responses that are labelled under Vedana. So we get unpleasant Vedana. Yeah, we react towards some sense experience, including the mind, and we don't like it. So usually our initial response to that is to try and push it away from us in one way or another. So it's true of the body, but it's also true of the mind. And it becomes particularly sort of complicated and convoluted when it comes to the mind sense, because our responses, our reactions, are pleasant and painful and neutral, tie into our emotional responses very quickly. So we have an unpleasant experience. So an example might be in a personal relationship. We might feel emotionally hurt, say, because we feel someone isn't listening to us or seeing us as a person. Perhaps they, dismiss something that we say, say by laughing at it or whatever. And we experience an unpleasant emotional vedana. And we react with a feeling of aversion to that, yeah. And the next thing that happens is we have some kind of response to it. So this reaction to an unpleasant feeling or an emotional hurt can tip us into a spiral or a cycle of destructive thoughts and feelings. So it might go like this. It's usually not a clear series of thoughts, not as clear as I'm going to explain it now, but sometimes it happens just very quickly. But to sort of pad it out a bit, so it can happen in a flash, yeah. So psychic energy travels in some kind of direction, some familiar and known direction, usually down a particular pathway. So this person laughed and dismissed what we said. We feel hurt. We ties into this sense we have that we're familiar with, that nobody seems to really listen to me or acknowledges my presence. I feel invisible in life. I mean, this is just one example of what can happen. I can't feel seen and respected. That is hurtful. Why do I bother? I'd be better off being on my own, not being around people. Why is life so hard? Why do I never get what I want? So you probably get the idea, yeah. So some version of something like this gets triggered in us by this having this emotional, painful experience. And if it goes far enough, it can lead into, say, depression or a bad mood or an anger response, and a perceived, experience of the cause of that hurt being something that we want to remove. So we might strike out at the person, or what's just as common, sometimes more common, is that we turn that in towards ourselves and produce this story of feeling sorry for ourselves, feeling sort of bad about ourselves, etc. So the Buddha strongly emphasized the need to be aware of our initial response of pleasant, painful, and neutral if we wanted to avoid further pain and this reactive kind of cycle. So the first thing to say is we can't stop unpleasant vedana from arising. It's just a fact of life. So the body is subjective to painful experiences. We can't really escape that. We can't control what other people say about us, and some of that's going to be hurtful. However, we can be mindful and aware of our initial response to that stimulus, to that negative stimulus, in this case with unpleasant vedana. And by becoming aware, the Buddha said, and saturating that initial response with awareness, we won't add to that response with a reactive cycle. And he gave an example of this as, and probably many of you, already familiar with this, of the idea of two arrows. So I think a man gets shot in the eye, I think it is, very painful. And you can't avoid the pain of that experience. You know, if you're going to have a body, you're going to have some kind of painful experience. But then a second arrow is fired, as it were, fired by ourselves this time, if you like. And that's the second arrow of our reactivity to that initial stimulus, which produces further pain. And, you know, quite often in our case, it's on the psychological, emotional level that we experience this. So the Buddha said that, you know, the way to do this was to become aware of vedana, to hold the knowledge in our mind that when any stimulus comes, we're going to have usually a response of being pleasant, of liking, response of being unpleasant, of disliking, or some neutral response. More could be said about the neutral response, and it's quite interesting, but don't really have time today to talk about that. But if you want to look further into Maitreya Bandhu's book, I think he talks about it in there. Yeah, so if we pay attention to ourselves, to our bodies, to our minds, we can see when this initial response arises. And the Buddha said that if we stay with that initial response, and he described it as a kind of gap, the gap kind of opens up, which you can fill with awareness. And that gap is the gap between that initial response and the tendency to want to react to it. And you flood that gap with awareness. Then the possibility of the reactive response coming in, the aversion, or if it's a pleasant stimulus, the craving and the grasping, is less likely to happen. And the cycle of our reactivity starts to slow down the more and more we do this. So the Buddha was saying there's nothing inherent in vedana, in our pleasant, painful and neutral feelings, that causes us to react. So it might seem like that, you know, we have this, you know, strong, hurtful feeling, say, and it feels like we've really got to react to that. It feels automatic sometimes. And I don't know, maybe we react like that, we get angry, we say something that we regret, etc. But the Buddha was saying, you don't have to do that. It's not fixed anywhere in the nature of things that we have to react to the initial experience or feeling of vedana. And it's the simple staying with the sensate experience of the vedana and a kind of practicing to do that, that enables us to stay more strongly with it and slow down this reactive cycle. So in a little while, we're going to do a meditation where we're going to just explore our own experience as it is in this moment in terms of pleasant and painful, particularly. So this doesn't mean in our relationships, say, that we don't express ourselves. We don't let people know how we feel, say. But if we stay within this gap of vedana and or this gap between vedana and trishna, which is craving, which is the reactive response, if we stay in that gap and allow our reactive response to subside, which it does, by not feeding it, by not acting out on it, the reactive response does subside. And this is noticeable in our direct experience, that it does subside. We can then communicate out of a space that is much freer, much more open, much more in touch with ourselves, much more in touch with positive emotion, much clearer and much more creative. And there's a wonderful booklet that's written, or is a lecture that's been transcribed by Sangharakshita, called Mind Reactive, Mind Creative, and I recommend that you read that. It's a fantastic exploration of this way of non-reactivity. And this, the Buddha said, is the place of freedom. He said, through the awareness of that gap, through the non-responding, by the sitting in the gap of Vedana, sitting with our initial responses, our initial feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, creating this awareness in the gap, we free our minds from our reactive cycles, and thereby free ourselves from all the suffering potentially that's caused by that second arrow of the reactive mind. He didn't say it was easy to do this. In fact, he said that, kshanti, which is kind of the quality that we need to sit in a non-reactive state sometimes, and I'm sure we're all aware of this, where we've kind of bitten our tongue at a certain moment and decided not to respond. He described it as being a great asceticism, and I think he talked about kshanti, a patience, this forbearance, is what kshanti really means, as the greatest asceticism of all, which is quite something coming from the Buddha, because he was renowned for ascetic practice. But he said that kshanti, this forbearance, this sort of staying in the gap with our experience, is a great asceticism, but a great opportunity for practice, and a gateway to liberation, a gateway to freedom, and a gateway to a more creative mind, and a creative and loving response to our experience and to other people. Okay, so that's a bit about Vedana. I haven't talked about pleasant Vedana here, or neutral Vedana, simply because we don't have lots of time. But I refer you to Maitreya Bandhu's book, where he explores these more. But we will be doing that through the meditation that we're going to do in a moment. So we will have a look at unpleasant Vedana in our experience now, and pleasant Vedana, and how to be, start practicing just being with these aspects of our experience.
Naravira?
Yeah.
I don't have the groups options. Do I need to be host?
Oh, you do. Let me make you host.
Thank you.
Okay, you should be host now, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we might have lots of questions about that, but always best thing to do is to practice it in experience. So we'll do that for a little while, and then we can discuss it in the groups after the break. Okay, we're doing quite well for time. So if you want to get into a meditation posture, allowing a little bit of time to arrive in the meditative space. You can just let go of what's been said for the moment. Come inwards into awareness of our experience as it is right now. Making sure we have a stable posture. Feeling the ground beneath us through chair or stools or cushions, whatever we're sitting on. The earth beneath us supporting us. And this support in the posture, the stability of the posture enables us to relax and let go. So giving up the body to gravity. Just allowing the posture to keep us upright. The minimum amount of effort needed just to keep the body upright, and everything else can just relax. And feel some sense of stability in the posture. And pay attention to the other dimension of our posture, which is the alertness. So out of the grounded base, the spine rises up. If we like, we can imagine ourselves breathing in through the base of the spine. Breathing up through from the earth to the base of the spine. Allowing energy to flow up the length of the spine, up to the neck, up to the crown of the head. You can imagine that energy going out of the crown of the head, So the energy of the breath, making the upper body alert. So noticing where our attention is. So we are with our attention. Even if our attention feels somewhat dissipated or distracted, often where we sense our attention is somewhere behind the eyes. So it's usually somewhere with the thinking mind. So if it is, our attention is with our thoughts, with the thinking mind, with the head, unhooking from thinking, coming into the sensations of the head and face. Sensations. So this is the direct experience of our body. Tactile, sensate experience. So we might be able to sense the jaw, muscles of the jaw. We might be aware of something around the eyes. We may be aware of a tingling or buzzing in the lips. Looking for the direct sensate experience of the body. We're just going to come down through the body to the lower abdomen. This will help us to get away from the thinking mind and the tendency to kind of ping back to our thinking minds. So come down through the body, looking for the direct physical sensations as we come down. So looking for sensations in the neck and throat. Looking for sensations in the upper chest. So this could be the area around the heart, rib cage. Whatever sensations we pick up there. So we might form an idea of a certain part of the body, a kind of mental image of it. But looking beyond that mental idea of the body into the actual physical sensations. The tactile part of our experience. You can be aware of the bottom of the rib cage, where the diaphragm is, the muscle that controls our breathing, large muscle that runs along the bottom of the rib cage. Often a lot of sensation in this area. There's also often quite a lot of tension around the diaphragm. It might help us to get into a particular part of the body by imagining ourselves breathing directly into that part of the body. Imagine breathing through the surface, the skin around that area of the body, as if you were taking the air in through the skin. Going down to the lower abdomen. So this is the area below the navel. Again, looking for the direct tactile sensations. You may be able to pick up sensations associated with the breathing in the lower abdomen. Trying to stay with the actual tactile sensations themselves as they appear. So becoming aware of the body as a whole, becoming aware of any unpleasant sensate experiences in the body. Not getting too hung up on what is and what isn't a pleasant experience or an unpleasant experience. Just something that seems unpleasant. So there may be some tension somewhere in the body, back or shoulders. Just allowing ourselves to go into that part of the body where we feel something unpleasant. If you're experiencing a lot of pain at the moment, maybe don't go to something that's very painful, because that can cause a lot of aversion. Just pick something that is an unpleasant bodily sensation. So see if we can notice our response to this unpleasant sensation. We may be aware that we don't want to move towards it. We might notice ourselves flipping back into thinking, which is one way of avoiding unpleasant sensation. Trying as much as we can to stay with the unpleasant sensation. Try to stay with it past the response and looking just at the actual sensate experience itself. Using a kindly attention, becoming curious about this sensation. What's it actually like? Is it just one single sensation, or is it made up of a number of different sensations? To taste, as it were, what the sensation is actually like, beyond our labels about it. Continuing to be aware of any aversion that we have to this sensation or this group of sensations. Seeing if we can stick just a little bit more with the actual sensate experience itself. And if we are able to stay with the actual sensate experience, does this make it easier to be with this part of experience? You may even find that staying in awareness and mindfulness of the sensate experience we have been labeling as unpleasant, it may even change. It may seem less unpleasant and more just something like a strong, energetic experience. Just being open to noticing any change in our response. You might also notice that experience on a sensate level is not static. Notice there's a continual sense of movement within the sensations. It may appear more as a buzzing or a humming, something more energetic than a fixed idea about a certain something. Looking in our direct experience here and now. So we can let go of our attention to unpleasant experience, this particular group of sensations. Coming back to awareness of the body as a whole. Aware of our feet, our arms and legs, our bottom sitting on the cushion or chair. And turning our attention now towards pleasant vedana within the body. So looking for feelings of warmth, pleasantness, comfort. There might be kind of glowing sensations or tingling sensations. Might be in areas where the body feels soft, perhaps in the lower abdomen or around the mouth and lips. Maybe in the hands. And picking one of these areas of pleasant sensation. Again, not getting too hung up on the idea of it, just picking something that seems pleasant. Resting attention there, noticing the particular sensations of that part of the body. Also notice our emotional response to this part of the body. Does it feel easier to be with pleasant experience than unpleasant experience? Can we give ourselves over to a pleasant experience? Well, we feel that we can stay to some extent with that pleasant vedana, pleasant sensation within the body, and to notice in more detail the feel of it, the texture of it. What are the sensations actually appearing like? You may in fact notice that these pleasant sensations, like the unpleasant sensations, break down into something more like an energetic tingling or buzzing, almost like a cloud of energy. vibrating energy. Notice whether being in touch with this pleasant sensation leads to any kind of craving. So that's a desire, or might appear as a desire for the pleasant sensation to continue or to increase. It's something that will be subtly pulling us away from the direct sensate experience itself. Usually sending us to the thinking mind. If we notice that happening, just coming back to the direct sensate experience. Notice also, if it's possible, or ask yourself the question, is this pleasant sensation static? Or is it something that seems like it's moving? Maybe like a flow of continual smaller sensation, something like that. Exploring this in our direct experience. And then letting go of the effort we've been making. And slowly, in our own time, just bring the meditation to a close.